Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar. This is Time Management, How to Avoid Wasting Time. I'm Paul Nowak, the founder and program director here at Iris, and this is one of the webinars in our productivity course. I think you'll find it to be very useful. Time management is something that all of us are constantly doing, whether or not we actively are conscious about it or not, but you're always managing your time. Whatever you're doing right now, you're deciding to take up your time and you're ignoring other things. Now, some of you might be multitasking. Some people that look at webinars, they'll listen to the webinar, they're checking their email in another browser or another tab. I'd like you to focus on this. I'm going to try to get right into it, and I want to give you some ideas on how I end up managing my time. Some of these time management techniques are actually based on research. Some of these things are ideas that have worked really well for me. And ultimately, I hope you'll come away from this webinar not with me telling you exactly here's how you should be managing your time, but more so getting some ideas from the way that I manage my time and other tips and tricks and seeing how you could turn that into a system for yourself. So let's get right into it. First of all, managing your time requires you to be organized. So one of the obvious things is that you should use a calendar. Well, that's obvious, but what isn't as obvious is to not use your calendar for tasks. So if you're using your calendar currently for tasks, you might end up seeing that you might say, well, I want to get this done, and that done today. And sometimes it doesn't get done today. So avoid putting your to-do list on your calendar. The calendar that I recommend is Google Calendar. Your to-do list, where should it go? The to-do list should go somewhere else. Maybe it's a to-do list that you keep in another program. I recommend using Evernote. I like Evernote because it can store everything in the cloud, but I could also still access it offline. And Evernote, by the way, works with Mac, PC, also works on your phone if you've got a smartphone like iPhone or an Android device. They also have an iPad app. But the idea behind Evernote is to keep yourself organized. Actually, let me show you exactly how I use Evernote and Google Calendar kind of side by side, because I would say as far as my time management system and my system for getting things done, these are the two main programs that I use to kind of stay on top of my time, manage it very, very effectively. So let me share my screen here, and you'll see I'm going to open up. Let's start with the calendar. So to go to Google Calendar, you just go google.com/calendar, and that will open it up for you. Now, if you're not using Google Calendar, I highly recommend it. Of course, you could use a number of other calendar applications. I use this mainly because I have a Gmail and I use Google Apps. So here's an example of my calendar right now for the month of October. And you can see that the thing that I like about Google Calendar, it allows you to have multiple calendars. You see on the side over here, I have a personal calendar. I have a calendar called Bills. This is obviously where I have different due dates for when bills are coming up. I also have a calendar called Reminders. I want to focus on these two calendars that you see, the one in blue, Personal, and the one in orange, Reminders. And here's why. These are the two main calendars I use to manage my time. The Personal calendar, what you see in blue, the only thing that shows up on the Personal calendar are appointments and things that absolutely have to be done at a certain time. So appointments are one thing. You can see on here I have the webinars that I'm going to be doing today. If I have a phone call scheduled, I'll put it on my Google Calendar. Now, my Reminders calendar is separate. The Reminders calendar is something along the lines of maybe you've got a yearly subscription to something. For example, I have over here Dropbox renewal date. And I have that as a reminder so I know that, okay, this is going to renew on the 6th. I need to decide whether or not it's worth it to renew it. Your reminders could be a bunch of different things, but the idea is that your reminders are simply something that I check my calendar every single morning, and I also check it at the end of the day to see what's coming up on the next day or the next week. But the reminder calendar is there to tell you, oh, don't forget to blah, blah, blah. This is something that is not effective to put on a to-do list, because your to-do list is not going to, tell you, hey, don't forget to do this on a certain date, a certain time. Now, another way to handle reminders is to maybe get a reminder app on your phone. That's something that I sometimes use. So I'm sure there's plenty of reminder apps, so I'm not even going to get into the ones that I recommend. But go with something simple. But this personal calendar, make sure that you're not putting your to-do items on here. These are just items of specifically scheduled things that you need to remember because it's either a phone call or a meeting or an appointment or some kind of event that you're going to be attending. Okay? And I don't put events that I think I might attend. I put events that I'm definitely going to be attending. And as you can see with Google Calendar, this is one of the advantages. You can see a calendar only once. So let's say I only want to see the reminders calendar. I just click on personal, and I'm only looking at all my reminders now. And let's say I only want to see my appointments. I click on personal, get rid of reminders, and now I see all the blue stuff in appointments. So you could have as many calendars as you want. I recommend keeping it to a minimum. I used to have like 10 calendars over here, and it would just be way too much. So try to keep it to a minimum if you can. That's how I use my calendar to manage my time. But there's also tasks and projects. Where do I put those? That takes us to Evernote. So let me show you an example of how I might use Evernote. Now, I set up a separate account on Evernote, and I could switch to my account, but I want to keep it simple right now so you can see how a very bare bones Evernote looks. First of all, you have everything in notebooks. So this is one notebook that says My Notebook. I could add another notebook right here. So I might keep track of receipts in here. Or I might have another notebook called, let's say, Projects. Or maybe I have another notebook called, Vital Records, where you can keep track of maybe business licenses that you have. Maybe you keep track of your birth certificate, social security card, and so on. But the idea here is that you can add notes very easily and keep track of tasks and projects in Evernote. So let's say the project is redesign website. You can easily add that here and then set up check marks for, find designer, request mockups, and so on and so forth with adding tasks. And when you're done with them, you just kind of check them off. So I like to use Evernote to keep track of projects, to keep track of tasks. Also, Evernote allows you to easily save something to your Evernote account. You can use the Evernote web clipper. So if you find something interesting on the web, you can just click on the Evernote web clipper right here, and that will save it to your Evernote account automatically. So Evernote has a lot of functionality. You can also save things from your phone. But the idea here is that you're managing your time. But when I say manage time, some people might look at Evernote and they're like, well, how is that related to time? Well, it keeps track of all my tasks and projects in one simple place. Essentially, I keep all of my notes in Evernote. If you were to, I'm not going to open up my actual Evernote account here because it's got a bunch of different notebooks, but I keep track of receipts, I keep track of taxes, I keep track of ideas, I have full notebooks for ideas, and I also keep track of the things that I have to do. So it's really, really robust. There's a lot that you can do with it, so that's why I highly recommend it. Let's go back to our slides and continue on with the presentation here. So I wanted to give you an idea of how I use Google Calendar and Evernote. I use it to stay organized, and if I can stay organized, that's going to help me manage my time better. So here's another thing I want you to think about with time management. Checking your email. Before you check your email, I think you should have, an idea of what are the most important things I need to get done today. And checking your email is, without a doubt, not one of those things. Checking your email is just a routine thing that you do maybe on a daily basis or multiple times a day. I'm thinking what I like to do is designate, before the day is started, at the end of the previous day, I designate what are the 3 most important things I need to get done tomorrow. And then in the morning, I take a look at that, and I call this MIT, so most important tasks. And actually, the idea from this, I have to give credit for where credit is due. I got this idea from Leo Babauta from the popular productivity blog called ZenHabits.com. And he talks about having these 3 most important tasks. And I remember reading about this a couple years ago. It was recommended by him. And this has, I can't tell you how much this has helped me. Just the simple idea of having 3 most important tasks of the day. And it doesn't have to be 3. At very most, it should be 3. But it could just be one thing. And the idea is that you work on this task or this project before you check email. So I used to have this really bad habit of checking email first thing in the morning, and I would let my email dictate what kind of work I would do during the day. And this was a horrible habit. And I have a feeling that a lot of people are stuck in the same kind of habit where they check their email before they get their most important projects done. So I try to now let's say your project is going to take a very, very long time. And there's no way you could work on this project to completion and then check your email, because then you won't check your email at all. And maybe you have to check your email every day to respond and stay on top of things. Well, what I do then is I'll still have my 3 most important projects designated. But instead of trying to complete that project, maybe I can't complete it in an hour or 2. Maybe it's going to take a few weeks. But the goal is that I make some kind of progress on that project. Now, how do I know I'm making progress on that project? Well, again, I have that project stored in Evernote. And let's say this was a project like, web design. Then I'll make sure I can tell how far along that project is by the check marks in my Evernote account. And, this project might have, 100 different tasks associated with it. But I can see where I am by constantly checking things off and going back to it. So make sure you designate what your 3 most important things are, 3 at the most. But sometimes it might be 1, sometimes it might be 2, but you do not want to have a list of task items that is 20, 30 things. Now, you might have 20 or 30 things to do, but that's going to go on your to-do list. Your to-do list could be separate. You could have a separate item in Evernote called just simply to-do list, or if you'd prefer to just call it, let's say, task list. And that's where you can have, task by task by task. So keep that in mind. But I really want you to think about getting these tasks done before you actually check your email. It's going to help you get a lot more done. Now, also think about, when are you most productive? Identify your peak performance time, and you want to schedule the most important projects and tasks around this time. You don't want to be working on your let's say you always know that in the afternoon I get really, really tired. Well, then I should not be waiting to do a project that's really important in the afternoon. I should try to get that done in the morning before I check my email. So don't schedule important things at times where you know you're not productive. Try to schedule those things at the times where you know you're most focused, when you're most alert. Now, I also want to emphasize the importance of taking regular breaks. Some people think they're more productive if they just sit at their desk for 5, 6, 7 hours a day and only get up just to maybe use the washroom. Taking regular breaks at certain intervals is a great way to kind of recharge your batteries. And this is very good for your brain too. We did some webinars where we discussed how the brain, there's research that shows, one particular study was talking about how when people would switch up tasks every 20 minutes, it would lead them to get things done faster and more effectively. It's basically because when you switch up tasks every 20 minutes, you're using a different part of your brain. And your brain, can't just focus on one thing for a whole 2-3 hours. It needs its regular breaks. So sometimes it's important to work on one thing and then either take a break by walking away. So for example, here's one idea or one kind of a time frame you can use. What if you focused on one single task or project for 25 minutes straight and then took a 5-minute break? 5-minute break could be getting up, walking around, using the washroom, getting some water, whatever. And then you do another 25 minutes and another 5-minute break. Now, if you feel you could focus for longer than that, and a lot of people have trouble for focusing more than 25 minutes at a time, but if you feel like you can do more than 25 minutes, try focusing for 50 minutes, 50 minutes, and then take a 10-minute break. 50 minutes, 10-minute break. Now, here's the problem. Some people will try to just work for a whole hour or 2 hours, and I guarantee you work is not being done that entire time. Or if it is being done, it's being done very slowly. Or here's another thing. People will work on multiple things during 2 hours. So they might be working in front of their screen for a whole 2 hours, but they worked on 7 different tasks. And they had different tabs open. They were juggling emails, phone calls, and we all know, or if you don't know by now, if you haven't looked at our webinar on multitasking for most things is not a good idea. There are very few things that you can actually multitask with, and if you single task and focus on one thing at a time, you're more likely to get it done faster and get more things done over the course of the day. So also have a time when you check your email. I want you to really think about how often should you be checking your email. Some people have the problem of having their email open all day long. And for most people, unless this is required by your job that you constantly monitor emails and reply to them ASAP, I doubt you need to have your email open all day. And I suggest that people have specific times that they check their email. I used to have a bad habit of constantly checking my email multiple times a day. How many times a day? I couldn't even count because I was checking my email on my phone when I was away from the office, during my lunch breaks, outside of work hours. not just on my phone, but I would have it open in another tab. So I'd be working on a project, but every so often I'd check back at that tab to see, hey, did I get a new email? And when I did, what happened? That distracted me from that project. So I want you to think about how often can you check your email. To give you a personal example, I check my email twice a day. I've gotten it down to 2 times a day. Now, this was not easy, I will admit. This was really hard because I developed this habit of constantly checking my email, and then getting it back down to 2 times a day was difficult. But now I check it sometime in the morning and sometime in the afternoon. I try to check in the afternoon. I usually try to schedule it for 3 p.m. But in the morning, when do I check it? You could have a specific time. For me, remember I talked about the most important tasks on this slide right here? I don't check my email until I've finished or made some kind of progress on those 3 most important tasks of the day. So sometimes that's 10 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes I don't check my email until 12 noon. And you know what? I had one day where I didn't check my email at all until 4 p.m., and you wouldn't believe how much I was able to get done. I felt like it was one of the most productive days I ever had. And it was all because I ignored my email. So I know that might sound like procrastination. Someone might say, well, you're procrastinating on your emails. And no, for me, the more important thing was to get the most important projects done. Checking email, hey, that's a passive form of communication. I could always respond to it later. And I also want you to think in terms of, we talked about priorities. How do you identify and focus on those biggest priorities? I want you to think about it like this. What is the one thing I could work on right now that will have the biggest impact for the work that I'm doing? And that is probably what you should be focusing on during the day. And this is a really important question to ask yourself once a day. What will have the biggest impact? What's the one thing I can do that will have the biggest, result? Now, it's also important to outsource or delegate things that are not as important, that aren't your priorities. So I know some people are like, well, I don't have anyone I can delegate to. This is not just work-related tasks. Sometimes, family members or friends will ask you, hey, can you do this? And sometimes it's just a matter of, saying I can't, or, do you mind doing it, or asking if somebody else can do this instead. So I know I am one of 5 brothers, and my mom and dad were really good at delegating things. Once we got of age and we could go to the grocery store, they would say, hey, go to the grocery store, get these items. And delegating, it probably made more sense to delegate it to me as a kid to get the grocery items than for my dad, because he had more important things to work on. So outsourcing and delegating is incredibly important, not just work tasks, but also personal tasks. So try to find ways, always ask yourself, should I be working on this? Or can I delegate this to somebody else? And in my business, actually, if you are a business owner, this is one of the pitfalls that they find with managers and entrepreneurs and small business owners, that they get to a point, because small business owners are used to doing everything. Initially, when you start up a business, you have to do everything because you don't have, 5, 10, 20, or 100 plus employees. So you have to work on everything. But they find that the biggest problem that entrepreneurs have as they start growing little by little is the entrepreneur, the manager, or the owner doesn't know how to delegate. And they still want to do everything. And that ends up locking up their time, and they aren't able to work on the most important things, the priorities. And I found this personally true with my business. I got to a point where I was doing everything, and I ended up doing these 80-hour weeks where I was just working. And finally, once I got, an assistant, I can't tell you, once I had someone to help me out with some of the administrative tasks that were taking me a lot of time, that changed the business. That helped us grow like never before. So keep that in mind. If you can delegate, that's going to improve your ability to manage time. Now, I also want you to think about reducing hours to force an increase in productivity. Here's what I mean by this. I want you to think about, if you have some flexibility over your time, if your boss came up to you, or let's say you're a business owner and you can decide how much time you want to work per week. If your boss came up to you and said, you know what, I'm going to pay you the same amount of money, but I'm going to cut your hours. I want you to get the same, let's say you work a 40-hour week. What if your boss told you got to get all the same stuff done in 30 hours? I have a feeling that a lot of people would be able to do it. Why? Because they would just force themselves to be more productive in less time. And you can almost think of this, having less time to do something. think about how that improves your focus. Think about how that improves your ability to be productive. So sometimes just shortening the amount of time that you dedicate to a certain kind of task will increase your productivity. So keep this in mind. This is another way to improve your time management, because when you have less time, you have to manage it more effectively. Some of you might be aware there was a study that was done in the past. Actually, I think they've done the study numerous times. And what they found with college students, they were looking at college students and their grades, and they compared two sets of college students: the students that had part-time jobs and the students that did not have part-time jobs. So both were full-time students, but one group of students actually had a part-time job, so they essentially had less time to study. Well, here's what they found. The students with less time to study ended up getting better grades. And they explained this by saying, the students that had less time, you would think that the students that did not have the part-time job would be getting much better grades because they have so much more time to study. Well, what they found was the people that had more time to study ended up wasting more time. I want you to think about that, because that's a very powerful, example of sometimes when we have more time, we end up wasting more of it. When we have very little time, we make sure that we manage it effectively. And that's what a lot of college students that are working part-time jobs do. They know how to manage their time very well. They know that, I only have a few hours to study. I'm going to make the most of it. I'm going to focus more. It actually forces you to focus more. Now, some of you might be familiar with this 80-20 principle. I want to talk about it really quickly. It states that 20% of the inputs generate 80% of the outputs. So in other words, you could think of it as 20% of your effort generates 80% of the result. Now, there's a whole bunch of different examples of the 80-20 principle. It's also known as Pareto's law. And Pareto, he was this Italian mathematician that was kind of the first person to write on this concept extensively, what they now know as the 80-20 principle. And when he was writing about it, he was talking about how in Italy, he claimed that 20% of the population had 80% of the wealth. Now, this is just one example of the 80-20 principle, but you can think of it in other ways. Sometimes 20% of the company's products give them 80% of the revenue. If you think of companies like Apple, that's probably without a doubt true, that a small percentage of their products generate most of the revenue. Now, when we say 80-20, we don't mean exactly 80-20. It might be 10% of the products giving 90%, or 25% of the products giving 60 or 70%. It doesn't have to add up to 100. The idea here is that a small amount of effort will sometimes generate most of the results, or a small percentage of your effort. Or think about it like this. Sometimes 20% of your time is generating 80% of the result that you want. So it's important to know, where am I spending that 20%? What 20% is generating the best 80% for me? And to focus on that and to try to do more of that. You could also think that 80% of your time is only giving you 20% of the result. I'll give you an example of that. If you're checking email most of the day, that's part of that 80% of the time, and it might not be giving you much of a result. You're just, getting back to people. It's just administrative things that are part of your routine. So I want you to think about, how can you use the 80-20 principle and start thinking about your life in the context of the 80-20 principle to get better productivity, to get better time management. Maybe you find that 80% of your week is being consumed by email, meetings, and just meaningless tasks, and that 20% is giving you most of what's actually getting done. Well, that means it's time to start delegating those meaningless tasks, or that means it's time to start cutting out those things, not attending every single meeting. And it's also important to say no to non-essential tasks. Saying no, if somebody says, hey, do you mind working on this? Sometimes in a work environment, it's a good idea to say, you know what, I've got this other project I'm working on. I can't take on this right now. And just saying no to tasks that are not essential, or delegating them. Now, let's say you've got really, really big projects. It's a good idea to break those large, very time-consuming projects into smaller tasks. So if you have a project like we discussed earlier, let's say you've got to redesign the website. Well, that's a project that's going to take, there's probably hundreds of tasks associated with that. So you can break that down into a number of different smaller projects, or you can think of them as mini projects or micro projects. So try to see how you can break those large time-consuming tasks into smaller tasks, because a lot of times people get caught up in that large task and it takes so much time that they either avoid doing it, they procrastinate on it, and if you could break it up into smaller chunks, it's easier to get those quick wins. Now, there's another thing I want you to practice for yourself. Try this. We call the 10-minute rule. The 10-minute rule requires you to once a day work on a task that is, you really don't want to work on this. It's a dreaded task. It's really, you're not excited about it, but you gotta at some point get it done. Now, if you do this 10 minutes a day, it's kind of like ripping off a Band-Aid. You just force yourself to do something. You can almost think of it like a game. I'm gonna just work on this even though I don't want to. And if you do this 10 minutes a day, you start getting into, kind of like a routine, and you get used to it. And usually you're able to finish these things that are, all of us end up having these tasks that we're maybe not excited about, but we got to get them done. And sometimes we procrastinate on those things. So try to do 10 minutes a day to focus on and tell yourself, I'm going to work on this one thing that I've been procrastinating on that I really don't want to do, but let me just try to get it done for 10 minutes, see how much I can get done. Another important thing, try to track your time. Think about, where is all your time going? If I asked you, how many minutes do you spend a day on email, on projects, on this task, on that task, most people would not be able to tell. But if you start tracking your time, it starts leading you to insights on how much time am I spending here and there. And also, it allows you to kind of remember that 80-20 principle. It allows you to do like an 80-20 analysis. Where is most of my time being spent? Can I optimize? Can I cut things out? Now, if you're going to be tracking your time, doing it by pen and paper might not be the most efficient way. Maybe you want to do it in a spreadsheet, or what I recommend, get an application on your phone if you have a smartphone. For the iPhone and the iPad, a really good time tracking app is called Hours Tracker. And if you've got an Android device, you can use an application called Time Recording. Both are very, very simple to use applications. Both of them have free and paid versions. So check those out if you're really interested in tracking your time. That will help you manage it more effectively, and I think it'll help you be more productive ultimately. Now, it's also important to make sure that you don't manage your time to the point where you have no flexibility. You want to make sure that your schedule allows for some flexibility, because we all know that there's going to be unexpected interruptions. There's going to be new priorities that pop up in the middle of the day. So you might say, I've got these 3 most important tasks, but then you find something that's, pretty much more important than the previous task that you thought. It's a good idea to make sure that you have that flexibility in your schedule. Otherwise, if it's so rigid, then it's kind of hard to get work done, or those new priorities, you don't make them priorities, and that could be a problem. So make sure you've got some flexibility. Now, limiting distractions is another thing. So a lot of times we get distracted by other people. I remember before I was running my business full time, when I was working in an office environment, it was very easy to get distracted by other people. Sometimes people would drop by, hey, you want to go for a coffee break? Or someone would ask, hey, did you check out that YouTube video I just sent you? Or sometimes they're just coming by to chit chat. Or sometimes someone would drop by to say, hey, did you get that email I sent you? Well, I'll get to it when I can. It's so easy to get distracted by other people. And there are some ways that you can try to limit your distractions. One, try to see if you could work from another area of the office, or try to get in earlier than everybody else. I actually requested, I remember, to come in. I used to have a 9-to-5 job. I asked my supervisor if I could come in at 7, 2 hours earlier instead, and leave 2 hours earlier. And she was fine with that. And that actually helped me get so much more done, because I was getting in 2 hours before everybody else in my department was getting in. And by doing that, I was able to get so much more done because I was less distracted. I got in, nobody was there to distract me. I was able to get my most important things done. And distractions are everywhere. Now, there's also web-based distractions. So I've got on the screen here, some of the weapons of mass distraction. And they include Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and a variety of other, social media sites. We need to really make sure that we're keeping those in check. Those can be very powerful tools. I think they're great tools, but the internet and technology and all of this is, helps us become potentially more productive, but it also has the potential to make us very, very unproductive. So just realizing that and making sure that you're limiting your time on these kind of things that can easily, I don't know how many times I've gone on Facebook and I was going to go there to send somebody a message, and I sent them the message, but then I got caught up in the news feed. And then somebody started chatting with me. And before I knew it, I thought I was going to be on Facebook for 5 minutes, and all of a sudden I've spent 45 minutes on Facebook. This is, it gets a little ridiculous. Sometimes you're not trying to be distracted, but these websites pull you in. So I want to talk about how do we stay focused online? Because it's hard. It's not easy. And I want you to know that there is an app for that. So if you want to stay focused online, this is actually an app called Stay Focused. And by the way, it is purposely misspelled over here without an E. But Stay Focused is a great application. You see it's a Google Chrome extension. Now, I don't know if they have this for the other browsers right now, but I want to show you what it looks like. And by the way, if you're not using Google Chrome, you might be using another browser, maybe Firefox or Internet Explorer or Safari. I highly recommend Google Chrome. You should definitely try it out if you haven't before. It's a very, very fast browser. I think it's the fastest browser to date as of now. Now, the other browsers are very, very good. Firefox is a great browser. I'm currently using Google Chrome, and let me show you how the Google Chrome Stay Focused extension works. So let me switch over to a browser window. Now, Stay Focused is this application on the top right-hand corner. It looks like a little eyeball with a clock in the middle. Now, here's what the application does. It allows me to manage my time online. So first, let me actually remove this application so I can show you how I get it. So if you're in Google Chrome, you simply search for the Google Chrome Web Store. So if I search Chrome Web Store, it'll be the first result that shows up here. And this is where I look for the Stay Focused app. And I could just type Stay Focused. And you see it's the first one right there. So what I would do is I would add to Chrome. I click the Add button right here. And you'll notice it's going to pop up right here. You see that? So it has been added to Chrome. Now the first thing you need to do is set your options. So here's the purpose of the app. I want to make sure I'm not spending too much time on certain websites like Facebook, YouTube, and so on. Well, you see right here it says maximum time allowed per day. Set the maximum number of minutes per day that you would like to browse websites on the blocked sites list. Okay, so it's by default set to 10 minutes. The blocked sites list is right over here. If I click on that, it'll take me to a little text box. This is where we want to designate what websites do you want to block. So let's say I want to block Facebook. I type facebook.com. And let's say I also want to block youtube.com. And let's say I also want to block, I find myself, I like to visit drudgereport.com to check out, news, what's going on in the world. But I want to make sure I don't spend too much time there. So I click Add Blocked Sites. Now they've been added. And you could add whatever you want here. And actually, it says right here, want some suggestions of sites you should block? Check out this list. So they have suggestions of time-wasting sites as well. Now, after we've done this, we go to maximum time allowed. And right now it's at 10 minutes. So, okay, let's see what happens when I try to go on Facebook. So I said 10 minutes a day. I go on Facebook. Notice how this turned from blue to red. This app used to be blue. Now what it's doing, if I click on it, it is now keeping track of my time. It says I've been on this for 9 minutes and 45 seconds, and it's counting down. I've been on it, for 15 seconds, and it's counting down for the 10 minutes that I have allowed. Well, same thing if I go to the other sites. Any of the other sites, it's going to start tracking my time. Now, here's the idea. Eventually, you're going to run out of time. So let's say you get down to, like right now, we're on 9 minutes, 30 seconds left about. So let's say I try to change it. We go to options. Because some people will be like, oh, I need more than 10 minutes. Because if you get down to a minute, you're gonna have this urge to say, you know what, I just want 11 more minutes. If I click set, notice what they say. They say, you're trying to give yourself more time, ? You're sure that's a good idea? Maybe you should reconsider. And it says, are you sure you want to increase the time allowed? I say, okay. And then it says, seriously, dude, the whole point of this extension is to stop you from procrastinating. You're only hurting yourself, and the kitten gets an electric shock every time you click okay. Are you sure you can live with yourself? And I say, okay. And then it says, meow. I hope you're happy. And as you can see, they make it kind of hard, and then it says your settings have been updated. So you can update this if you want, but they give you a hard time because they should be giving you a hard time. If you tell yourself you're only going to spend 10 minutes a day, now watch what happens. Because I want to show you what happens when you run out of time. I'm going to set this to 1 minute. I click set, and it says you're giving yourself less time. Slow clap. Well played, my friend. So, thank you. I click OK, and now watch what happens when I go back to Facebook. It turns red again, and now I only have so much time left. You'll notice I have, about 25 seconds left on the clock. And the whole point of this application is that you're limiting your time. You're telling yourself, I'm only going to spend 10 minutes a day on Facebook or whatever other websites that are time wasting to you, that distract you very easily. And this app, it's almost like an easy way to set a parental block on yourself to kind of keep your time in check. So eventually you can see we're winding down to 1, and now it won't allow me on the website anymore, and it shows this little, which I like, shouldn't you be working? And that reminds me, you know what? I should be working. I shouldn't be on Facebook because I'm doing a webinar right now. So let's get back to the webinar slides. So I wanted to show you that because Stay Focused is a great application for getting things done and making sure that you're managing your time and you're not wasting it online. It's so easy to get distracted easily online. So let's talk about some other time management techniques. So I want to talk about meetings because a lot of us don't like meetings. Most people feel that there's too many meetings scheduled, and meetings that are just pointless sometimes, or meetings that you're in that you feel maybe you shouldn't be in. So sometimes it's a good idea to maybe see if you can squeeze out of these meetings, and if it's not important for you to be there, see if your supervisor or if you could avoid it on your own, or if you have control of those meetings, making sure you don't overschedule them. But also it's really important to make sure that you manage your time with meetings. So if you're the person deciding that you're going to create a meeting and you're going to invite a few other coworkers to sit in on this meeting, well, for some reason, people have the standard idea that meetings should be 30 minutes or an hour. Well, not every meeting should be 30 minutes. No one ever requests a 12-minute meeting for some reason, or a 17-minute meeting. Try to keep your meetings down to a very, very specific amount of time. And also make sure you have a very clearly thought out agenda for those meetings. I remember, just to kind of rewind, I used to work in this department where we had a weekly meeting on every Monday, and it was a 1-hour meeting. It took about an hour to finish that meeting. Sometimes it took a little longer. Why did it take an hour? Well, the first 15-20 minutes of the meeting were, everyone was just kind of socializing. Now, you don't want to come off as antisocial, but the idea, if you're going to have some kind of meeting, you want to get right to the point. Nothing's wrong with a little bit of chit-chat here and there. Oh, how's the weather? How was your weekend? And so on. But it's important to get things done because remember how we said, what if we reduced the amount of time? Can we get better productivity? If everybody in that meeting, let's say it's normally a 1-hour meeting. When I had these meetings, I remember they were really only about 15 minutes of essential content or meeting time. The rest was, socializing, people cracking jokes, and not really a focused agenda. What if you told yourself, we only have 15 minutes to get this meeting done, or only 12 minutes? You'd make sure that you got all of your points in for that time. So, and anyway, overstacking your schedule with meetings keeps you from getting the more important things done. Let's talk about phone calls. Same thing. Making sure that you have a very focused phone call. You know why you're calling the person, what you need to get out of it, and also setting a time limit for how much time you want to spend on a particular phone call is very, very important. I actually like to carry around a little timer, and I will actually set a time, or you might have this timer online. But making sure that you're not spending too much time and your calls are very, very focused, that's going to help you from wasting your time. It's amazing how much time gets wasted on meetings and also phone calls. Now, tasks and projects, this is another area where you can try to figure out how much time should I be taking? How much time do I want to dedicate to this project or this task? Try to see if you could schedule and have deadlines for this. And there's also other areas like reading. Let's say you're doing a certain amount of reading. I want to introduce you to this deadline technique. If you've taken one of our speed reading classes, you may have heard of it. But the idea is that trying to increase your productivity or your reading speed with a deadline. So here's how you would do this. Very, very simple. Whatever you're reading, you see how long it takes you to complete 1 minute. So let's say you start reading, you start your timer, and at the end of the minute you see that, you know what, it took me, let's say, 1 minute and 10 seconds to read the page. Now, if you're a trained speed reader, you might be going a little faster than that. But the whole point is you test out how long does it take me to read one page. So if it took you 1 minute and 10 seconds, what you do then is you cut the time down. Remember how we said when we reduce the amount of time, we can sometimes increase our productivity? Well, if it took you 1 minute and 10 seconds, what if you cut it down to a minute? What if you told yourself, I'm going to try to read through one page in 1 minute? How much more productive could you be? And I'll tell you this right now, most people that do this, they find themselves focusing more on their reading, and they're able to get through it because they're focused on getting through that one page in 1 minute. Now, if one page in 1 minute is too repetitive for you, you might want to try 2 pages in 2 minutes. But the whole idea is that you're setting some kind of a deadline and trying to keep to that deadline. And by the way, this is also a good way to start improving your reading speed, because once you get used to getting it done in 1 minute, then you could say, hey, let me try to get through it in 50 seconds instead. And reducing the amount of time will usually help you read faster. This is another time management technique that actually relates to reading. So, to summarize, if we're trying to manage our time, first of all, we need to be organized. If we're not organized, if we're not using a calendar, if we don't have, a to-do list, a project list, a project that includes task items, it's very hard to stay on top of your time. And it's important to make sure that you're tracking your time. So try to use one of those applications that we talked about earlier. If you have an iPhone or an iPad, you might want to use it's called Hours Tracker. If you have an Android device, you might want to use Time Recording. That's another app. But keeping track and knowing where's your time going. And I think one of the more important things here is limit your distractions. So use that Stay Focused app that I talked about earlier. Try to limit your distractions by letting people know at your office that you're busy with something and you really need to focus. Most people are reasonable and they'll leave you alone. So keep track of these principles. I hope that you've found some of these ideas very helpful. And I want to thank you for attending the webinar. If you have questions about time management or anything else productivity related, or you have some you want a certain topic to be covered in the future, feel free to get in touch with me by email. I'll try to respond to you as quickly as I can. Or if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter, my contact information is on the screen right there. And I want to thank you for attending the webinar. This is one lesson within our productivity course. And if you've purchased the course, we hope you're finding it very helpful. Also, keep in mind, we do these workshops, these productivity workshops at companies and schools throughout the U.S. and also Canada. And we're also planning on rolling these out internationally as well. So, and of course, some of you might know us for doing our speed reading or memory improvement workshops. So if you're interested in setting that up at your school or at your company, feel free to get in touch with me directly or our support team. And again, thank you so much for coming out and supporting and checking out this webinar. And enjoy and have a very productive day.